views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
History tells us that it was started by the physical migration of African Americans out of the rural areas of the South and from the Caribbean into the New York City neighborhood of Harlem during the 1910, I should say. Now, although there's no official start date, there was an explosion of creativity, consciousness by people of African descent, propelling what was known as the Harlem Renaissance. Coming up on this edition of Perspectives, we explore and celebrate the centennial of the Harlem Renaissance. You're watching Perspectives with yours truly, Daren Jaime.
What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
What's on your mind? What's on your mind?
Let 'em know.
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference.
What's your perspective?
Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective?
Well, the Harlem Renaissance was an African-American cultural, social, artistic, and intellectual flowering that fostered a black cultural identity in the 1920s and 30s. And after returning from Europe at the end of World War I, where in France, black soldiers had been treated with a level of disrespect they rarely were afforded at home, they demanded equality with renewed urgency. It's on that backdrop that we're joined today by someone who truly understands the significance of the Harlem Renaissance. He is a Long Island, New York native. He spent his formative years living in Detroit, Michigan. He's an alumnus of Livingstone College, a historically black college in North Carolina, where he served as a presidential scholar, president of the Student Government Association, and president of the NAACP Alpha fraternity as well. Over his years, he's organized and led many efforts and public demonstrations to draw attention to the plight of marginalized and disinherited people. He's a founding member of the 100 Coalition, and presently, he serves as pastor of the Mother AME Zion Church in Harlem, the historic church, and he joins me here on this set of Perspectives. We welcome now the Reverend Malcolm J. Byrd, who's the pastor of the historic Mother Church, and good to have you.
Thrilled to be here.
Right
yeah.
there in the heart of Harlem.
Right in the heart of Harlem.
Yes, and
Right
so
indeed.
I want to take some time to talk a little bit about that Harlem Renaissance, right? I'm a Harlem man,
Right
born
on.
and raised in Harlem,
Right on.
St. Nick Project, so
Right on.
I'm excited for the fact that this Renaissance has come about. There's really a resurgence
Yes.
and also a celebration of some great people
Yes.
and great history. I
Yes.
mean, many times Harlem got the bad apple, if you will, for what was, rough days and rough times. But that's not the Harlem that
By
people
no
don't
means.
know.
Right, indeed, indeed. And again, I'm thrilled to be here on your program. Anyone who speaks of Harlem has to acknowledge the fact that everything good and wonderful and liberal regarding intellectual attributes, arts, education, music, had its roots somewhere in the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance salvaged the dignity of the American thought and spirit. And it was through the Harlem Renaissance that the United States was able really to truly show the world that not only were we patrons of the arts, but also we could produce art in such a way that made you question what you thought art was before. You know, to hear Duke Ellington move upon the ivories, to hear W.E.B. Du Bois lecture, to hear a poem of Claude McKay, to hear those sultry tones of Billie Holiday, to look at the collection of blackness that was carefully cataloged by Mr. Schomburg and others. The Harlem Renaissance really gave America back its greatness that America never gave the people who made the Harlem Renaissance what it was.
And when you look at the Harlem Renaissance, or just when you look at Harlem, What are the historical things that stick out for you, knowing who Harlem is today?
Well, if you talk about the Harlem Renaissance, there are very key places you have to talk about. We know about the Apollo Theater.
Right.
We've heard about the Cotton Club, the Savoy Ballroom, the Renaissance Ballroom. But we have to keep in mind that when the Harlem Renaissance began, those spaces were open to black performers, but those spaces were not open to black patrons. So you had the chorus girls at the Cotton Club. You had singers on stage at the Apollo, largely to all white audiences who had come up from downtown. So what you had to do in the Harlem Renaissance, the churches that were moving to Harlem that were growing by leaps and bounds, the black church in Harlem in the early days of the Harlem Renaissance had to operate as multi-purpose space. So in the case of Mother AME Zion, the church was built intentionally as a concert hall, as an auditorium, to give our people an opportunity to be patrons of the arts and of music and of education, what have you, in a space where we were not relegated either to a back corner or that we weren't allowed to enter in the first place.
You got great history at your church, right? You
Yes.
talk about the Harlem Renaissance. One of the names that comes out is Sojourner Truth. There's a story about Sojourner Truth and your church.
Yes, Sojourner Truth joined Mother AME Zion Church in 1829. And in 1843, before she began her missionary journey, essentially, to speak of the evils of slavery, in 1843, at the altar of Mother AME Zion Church, when it was then located at the corner of Church and Leonard Streets in present-day Tribeca, she changed her name from Isabella Baumfrey to Sojourner Truth. Wow. And the next day, she set out on a quest to be one of our nation's greatest suffragists and abolitionists. But there are other names associated with Mother Zion and the Harlem Renaissance. New York City's first black police officer, Samuel Battle, was a member of Mother Zion. Madam C.J. Walker, the first African-American millionaire and the first female self-made millionaire, was a member of Mother Zion Church. Florence Mills, the great vaudeville actress and performer, was a member of Mother Zion. You name it, the best and the brightest that could be found anywhere passed through that church at some point in time, particularly during the Harlem Renaissance.
And when the Harlem Renaissance is really viewed from and a look-back perspective, I don't think that many people really understood all the talent and all the history
Yes.
that was really going on in that time.
Yes.
That when we look back today, we're able to say, wow,
Yes.
all these people. But during the moment, it was just business as usual.
Right. I mean, can you imagine being in a place like Harlem in 1925 where all of the physicians were black, all of the lawyers were black, everywhere you look was black ingenuity and black intelligence, black brilliance in any direction you looked. Everything, you had James Van Der Zee with a camera really capturing the Harlem Renaissance as we know it, and because of him, we were able to really see, I'm going to read what it must have been like, but to see what it looked like in action, it must have been tremendous. I fantasize about that and wonder what it was like when I'm walking up Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard or Malcolm X Boulevard. I'm wondering, what was this place like in 1925? You know, what are some things I would have likely to have seen around here?
I remember having a conversation, listening to people talk about Gordon Parks, Art Shea,
Absolutely,
two of the greatest,
yes.
photographers
Without
out there,
question.
and they tell the story about Harlem was just a place that was as best as anywhere else in the whole wide world,
Yes.
right here, and people who look like us, and you found a great sense of dignity and pride,
Yes.
and it reflected even in their artwork and their pictures. Take a quick break. Coming up after the break, going to talk a little bit more about with Pastor Byrd about being that church that's actually in the middle of Harlem and right there nestled in the middle of Harlem. What did church really mean back during the time of the Harlem Renaissance? Talk about that in a minute. Be right back.
Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.
Let me tell you about the toughest guy on earth. He does the work of 2 jobs, but only gets paid for one. He's tough enough to feed the man that gave him a lifetime of nourishment. He has the crazy strength to lift the man that raised him up without even flinching. That's right. No employee of the month bonus check here. This guy, no, this warrior, will always be by his father's side, even if his dad will hardly remember. Good luck finding a gym to train for that. If this guy isn't the toughest guy on the planet, then I don't know who is. Caregiving is tougher than tough. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
And thank you for joining us. Continuing our conversation with Pastor Malcolm J. Byrd, pastor at the historic Mother African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in Harlem, New York, as we're sharing a little bit about the Renaissance of Harlem. And for your church, right? You're right nestled in it. For people who don't know where your church is, tell us a little bit about where your church is and what your church actually functioned as during the time of the Renaissance.
Well, Mother Zion sits in the middle of what is regarded as Central Harlem. We are on West 137th Street between Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard and Malcolm X Boulevard. Our current building was constructed and completed in 1925. The seating capacity of about 2,300 people. We had a black contractor that built the church 100 years ago. It was designed by a black architect. So when you walk into Mother AME Zion Church, everywhere you look is emblematic of black ingenuity and black brilliance everywhere you look. And as I mentioned before, the church really, our move to Harlem is really in large part due to a member of the church by the name of Philip Payton, who was regarded as the man who made Harlem black.
Wow.
Harlem was once an all-white neighborhood, and he was an early black real estate prospector. And so what we had to do, we were located on 89th Street in those days, what we had to do in order to buy an older Episcopal church, an older white congregation in Harlem, he devised a scheme because that white church would not sell to a black congregation. This is 1914. He devised a scheme where he got a white woman to buy the church on behalf of Mother Zion. And we gave her the money. She bought the church from that white congregation. And as soon as she left that office, she came right over and signed over the papers to Mother Zion. But that was Philip Payton's genius. He was a member of Mother Zion, graduate also of Livingstone College. And he is the one that created this migration for black people to be able to get into Harlem. He kind of broke those covenants that before would not permit black people to live.
Right.
He kind of opened it up.
And now you see a little bit of a different Harlem, right?
Yes.
And it's a totally different Harlem. Some people are very worried about, and I am very worried about the gentrification that's going on in there. Talk about that Renaissance and what it's like right now. What's it like living in that beast?
Well, this is not if I may speak historically, New York City has been gentrifying black people for 200 years. So black persons were congregated in the area known as Tribeca.
Right.
We migrated up into the area now known as Chinatown and Little Italy in there. We then moved to Greenwich Village. So if you look at the addresses of prominent African Americans from the 1820s into the 1860s, you will see where they were living were places like Greenwich Village. We then migrated to the Upper West Side and what have you. And so at every time gentrification happened in black neighborhoods, the church, in many respects, didn't get smaller, the church would get bigger because people were looking for an answer. What's the next place? Where are we to go next? What are we to do next? So it's in moments when, in places like Harlem, where you have a diminishing African-American presence in Harlem, that the church is really emerging as that voice and as a resurgence of, let's say, this new Harlem Renaissance, which includes persons who have moved from Chicago, from Atlanta, from Charlotte, who have moved to Harlem because they want to have that Harlem Renaissance feeling. Harlem is not as black as it once was, but in comparison to places like Chocolate City of DC and others, Harlem is still overwhelmingly black, largely because the cultural capital that black people have left in Harlem over the last 100 years, it may become gentrified, but it will always be black.
Well, and the other part about I went to Rice High School right there on 124th Street, and and we went to school there, and I remember being able to walk and to be able to have this freedom about walking and this pride about walking in the community that just looked like me, sounded like me, felt like me. And even now, you still have it with some upgrades, right?
Yeah, with upgrades that most of us can't afford.
Right.
And that is the problem. And so the new battle cry for this new Harlem Renaissance is not just an appeal for arts, but it is an appeal for black dignity in all forms. Economic justice, food security, housing security. What we see now is a lot of modern new buildings that have been built in Harlem now. Many of them are unoccupied because they are priced at a point where the people who could afford them are not quite ready to move to Harlem at that stage yet. And those old timers who've been there for a while can't afford even to look at the buildings, let alone move into them.
Right.
So that's the place where we are right now. And I have been very intentional about focusing the church on what is the new civil rights movement for us in the midst of a new Harlem Renaissance in 2019 right now.
What do you hear from the people who are your members, your congregation, about where Harlem is today? Do they like it? Do they understand it? What's their perspective?
Well, the average Harlemite is incredibly intelligent. They most certainly know exactly what's going on. They understand real estate. They understand real estate values and things of that nature. I don't know if it's a thing of whether or not people like it or not. It's a thing where this is kind of where we are right now. But the question now is, how do we exist as a people with an incredible amount of cultural capital in a community that's becoming that's looking less and less like the people who've inhabited it for the last 100 years.
Come back, talk more with Pastor Malcolm Byrd, pastor of the Mother Amy Zion Church in Harlem. We'll be back with some final thoughts from him when we return right after this.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally.
I did. Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands?
My son has lots of dolls. But did you know terry cloth diapers breathe better?
I did.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that strollers have the right of way on a sidewalk?
Yes.
Yep, I did. Did you guys
Did you know that kids who eat breakfast have higher GPAs?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's actually what I was going to say.
Did you know babies should never touch silver? It's really bad for them.
I knew that.
Did you guys know that statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the right seat to make sure your child is protected.
I'm putting that on my blog.
I just put it in mine.
Maybe you can make retirement happen. After all, you made this vacation happen.
Double points with every purchase?
Cleverly merging promotions.
Love it.
Cross-referencing travel sites. And booking all your flights with those...
Vouchers. I got us bumped.
They were like, oh. But now they're like... Aloha. You aced this vacation. Now get the tips you need to get on track at aceyourretirement.org.
And welcome back here. Continue our conversation with Pastor Malcolm Byrd, pastor of the historic Mother AME Zion Church in Harlem, New York. And so talk a little bit about Harlem Renaissance, talk a little bit about that. For you, did you have like the Harlem pastor that you looked up to coming around? If you look around, did you have anyone that you said,
That I wanted to emulate?
Yeah.
Well, I have a great affinity for the late Adam Clayton Powell Jr. He is without question one of my historic heroes, not just because obviously he's in the Alpha fraternity that I'm in, not just for the politics, but this unapologetic way that he was able to merge political engagement with conversations on faith and things of that nature. It was no discombobulation with Adam Powell on the political and the ecclesiastical. Mm-hmm. And he knew how the genius of those two, when they worked together, was incredibly beneficial. Paul Robeson talked about, he was interviewed in the early 1960s in Australia about, can the American Negro unite? Paul Robeson's response, who also was a member of Mother AME Zion Church, Paul Robeson's response was, if the black religious community in America all got on one accord and got behind one candidate, let's say for president, whoever they all got behind would undoubtedly win. Because he said there is no institution in America as organized as the black church. And I think he's right.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said there. I remember growing up, as I said, I grew up in Harlem, and, we moved over to Riverside Drive. The place we moved on Riverside Drive, the first black judge in New York City, Fritz Alexander. We took over for his apartment. Wow. And he was actually sworn in by one of our next door neighbors, who at the time was none other than David Dinkins. Who was the mayor? Yeah, that's right. So David Dinkins. That. Yeah, and as a matter of fact, when my father passed away, David Dinkins came off. He was running for mayor. Came off the campaign trail. Came upstairs. Talked to our family. Offered condolences, and then went back on campaigning and became the next mayor of New York City.
He's a truly great man, and every now and then when I get a chance to see him, always with his bow tie and double-breasted jacket, one of the greatest men who his contributions to our city, to Harlem, will be remembered for the next 300-400 years. Historians will always remember him favorably.
Yeah, yeah. Do we still talk about Bill Clinton in Harlem?
I don't know why we couldn't. I think him moving his office to Harlem following his term in Washington should have let people know then that Harlem was about to change.
Right.
And the change came to the black community. We understood the change after the fact, but there were other non-black conversations long before Mr. Clinton moved his office to Harlem. So by the time he moved, the next 20 years of development in Harlem had already been discussed. We just didn't get the memo.
Right.
We didn't get the memo, which is typical regarding redevelopment in black urban spaces. We are the last people to get the memo.
Got a little under 2 minutes left, but let me ask you a question. Where do you see Harlem going in the future?
I see the people of Harlem reigniting the fire that was lit 100 years ago. There is an interest, an abiding interest in the beauty of blackness. I believe that is where we're headed. There are people who are moving to Harlem, black people who are moving to Harlem, who really want to connect with that incredibly prosperous and proud chapter in Black American history. I think that's where we're going, without question. The question is, can we afford to live there in order to get there? You know, so that is the question, and we're working with some community agencies to really look at how to keep Harlem affordable, where the people who have made Harlem what it is can actually afford to continue to live there.
Wow. Pretty interesting stuff. So listen, you got to come back, visit us again.
I'd be honored.
Yes.
I'd be honored.
Reverend Malcolm J. Byrd,
Thank
who's
you.
the pastor of the Mother Amy Zion Church in Harlem, New York, talking about the Harlem Renaissance. And he's been our guest here. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us.
Honored. Thank you.
All righty, listen, that about wraps it up for this edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime saying, listen, until next time we meet, stay safe, share your perspective with somebody else. It just might make a difference in someone else's life. Take care. God bless.
Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with Shines of Light, cause it might make a difference in someone else's life. What's your perspective?
Well, Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.